Like an Acrobat podcast. I'm your host, Shenea Stiletto, two-time world champion in acrobatic gymnastics, USA Gymnastics Hall of Famer, and circus artist. I am currently in bankruptcy court seeking to hold USA Gymnastics legally accountable for the abuses inflicted upon me by my USA Gymnastics coach, David Rickbaum, for the first time. Please find extended conversations of this podcast on the circuspreneurblog.com. In this part 4 of episode 4, Black Acrobatic Gymnasts Experiences Matter, I will continue to discuss the multifaceted issue of racial bias within the sport with former Black acrobatic gymnast and current Black acrobatic gymnastics coach, Samantha Conway. By having these open dialogues, we are hoping to influence the environment of the organization on a fundamental level with the intention that USA Gymnastics will create new structures around coaching, judging, and gym ownership in an effort to fight racial bias, increase Black membership in positions of power, and institute policies which will provide a drastic increase in funding to abolish the underlying racial disparities that are prohibiting the next Black acrobatic gymnastics world champion. Please allow me to introduce my special guest, Samantha Conway. Samantha Conway started acrobatic gymnastics when she was 12 years old. She'd previously done artistic gymnastics as well. Samantha started as a top of a level 9's women's pair, where she worked with her sister and they competed together for a year as level 9 and then the senior level for 1 year as well. She was then in a level 7 women's pair as a base for a year and they were national champions. Samantha Conway transitioned into an 11 to 16 trio and they competed in Dresden, Germany and placed second. Her last partnership was a junior elite women's pair, 12 to 18, then 13 to 19, and they competed in Geneva, Switzerland, in Poland, and at the Pan American Games in Florida. They placed first at all of those competitions and were national champions for the 2 years that they were together, and placed third at the World Age Group competition in Antwerp, Belgium in 2018. Samantha Conway also was the athlete representative for her region in 2019 and is now a coach at Crescent City Gymnastics in New Orleans, Louisiana. Please allow me to introduce my special guest, Samantha Conway, to the show. And so, to open my conversation with Samantha Conway, I wanted to share a painful memory of my own where I remember parents asking that their daughters at one point not be roomed with me during competitions, and my mother having to call the gym directly and tell them how dare they, and that I was just like all of the other little girls, and that I had every right to share a room with them. I'll never forget that. And my mom, she is not a very outspoken person. She's a very gentle person. She's incredibly soft and smiley. And so for my mother to take it upon herself to call the gym directly, call the gym owners, I was not in her care at the time because I lived part-time with my coaches so that I could have high-level elite coaching. And so I was, in many situations, left on my own, even though my parents tried to do everything that they could to protect me during those times when I was away. They could only do so much. But this situation, this experience, they had just taken it way too far. It was a situation that I couldn't contain, where I would try to maybe hide situations from my parents. I didn't want them to get upset. I didn't want it to get in the way of my training, where we all default to as little athletes. That's such a precious experience for us, and we're always afraid that something's going to get in the way of it, and not knowing what to share and what not to share. is so difficult when you're a kid and when you have all of these different adults in your life that you are reporting to and seeing which one should get which information. But this is a situation that got to my mother, and she rallied for me, and I wanted to speak about that because in terms of how racially motivated that was, because it's not that someone outwardly said to me when we're speaking about outward expressions of racist interactions. No one said I won't have them sharing their room with Shenea because she is black. But they took it there because they felt and they knew that I could just even be available for that level of treatment because I am black. If that can get in, if that can seep deep inside for listeners, that people in these spaces believe on a visceral level that you are just available for such outrageous treatment, that they would not go there most often. I'm not saying 100% of the time, but most often would not dare think that a child that is not a child of color would be even available for that level of treatment, to even suggest a thing. And my mom knew. She knew what that was about. And as I said before, my mother is someone who is very soft-spoken. But that was just even too far for her. To imagine her daughter having to maybe just even room alone, but to have something suggested that even from so many years ago was a thing when we were combating racism in other ways, in other generations, and my mom got that. So with that, I want to go into my conversation with Samantha Conway and ask her the first question about her experience as a black acrobat within the sport of acrobatic gymnastics.
Hi, Shenea. Thank you so much for having me on the show. During my time as an athlete, I really don't feel like I had many or any instances of just blatant and open racism, but I do think that just the lack of representation of the black community as a whole in acro really affected me while I was competing. I think it, that lack of representation just goes from little things such as like it being very hard to find, a leotard that can match your skin tone, or tape that can match your skin tone, or a ballet slipper that can match your skin tone, to just the lack of diversity amongst the athletes and the coaches and the administration as a whole. I think that, starting from just how hard it is to find mesh that matches a darker complexion, I think that definitely there's been a lot of progress in that area. But I remember competing when I was younger, and you either had to get a very fair complected mesh, or you would have to get just plain black. And, for a person of a darker skin tone who's in a partnership with different races, like, for me personally, it was hard for me to, go out on the mat and know that my partners looked a certain way and my leotard didn't really look like I wanted to. I felt like I stood out kind of for the wrong reasons. And I think that, you know, I'm a very firm believer in if you look good, you feel good, and if you feel good, you compete to the best of your ability. And I think that just, you know, already walking on the mat with that little thing in the back of your mind that, like, I don't look the same as everybody else. My leotard doesn't look the same as everybody else. Or you can really see, you know, my tape, and you can really see, like, my ballet shoe to slide and to split. Like, it really stands out. Like, I just think little things like that really have a negative impact on your performance and have a negative impact on your experience in the sport as a whole. I also think just overall the, you know, lack of diversity amongst coaches and amongst people in power in acro really affected me while I was competing. I have definitely grown up in a very diverse environment. I also went to primarily white institutions for, like, you know, from all of my years of schooling. But I definitely think that, you know, being one of the only people of color a lot of times in the room made me feel a little, you know, excluded, which I definitely don't think that anybody even thought of that. I don't think anybody paid great attention to that, but I just think that as a person of color, you do notice when you're the only one in the room. You do notice when there aren't many people that look like you who are doing your specific sport. And I, you know, thank you so much for being a great role model for the people of color within the acrobatic community, because I know when I first started competing, I did not have anybody but you to look up to and to aspire to be like. I think that, you know, I have learned so many lessons from competing in acro, and I have, you know, taken those lessons with me into my adult life. And I think that acro is a great place, you know, to express yourself and, you know, better yourself. It teaches so many different things. But I also think that in order to have a more inclusive environment moving forward, there needs to be a more diverse board. The people in power need to be of all races, so that the standards of professionalism, the standards of perfection that are expected of athletes can be more inclusive of all races.
How does it feel, Samantha, to see so many Black acrobats, Black coaches, a Black judge speak out about the racial bias within the sport and USA Gymnastics?
I think it's really great to see so many, you know, Black representatives in the sport speaking out. I've seen so many posts on, you know, the official I Heart Acro Instagram page, just from various athletes of color. And I just think that it's really nice to see the Black community within the sport coming together and, you know, making our voices heard and calling attention to something that if you were not a person of color, you might not have realized, or if, you know, you did realize it but just didn't really know how to speak out about it. I think that just having the platform now to speak out about it and to voice how we feel as Black people in acrobatics is a really, really great thing that's happening now.
Do you think it's important for this conversation to continue and be out in the open so that we can see true change and more Black representation in the sport, and also better treatment of the Black representation already within the sport?
yes, I think that it is definitely important for these conversations to continue to be held within the acrobatic gymnastics community as well as all disciplines of gymnastics. I think that creating a platform where Black athletes and Black coaches and representatives of color within the sport can really come together and share their experiences in a setting where they feel like their voices are really being heard is an amazing tool to increase inclusivity, an amazing tool to increase support for the minority, and just overall an amazing tool to create growth within the sport.
Why do you think it's important for there to be more Black representation in acrobatic gymnastics?
I think it's really important for there to be Black representation within acro. You know, just speaking from personal experience, when I was a newbie coming into acro, you know, looking on YouTube or like on the website and trying to find someone who looked like me that had achieved great success within the sport, it was, you know, pretty hard to find. I think that it's very important for there to be representation, just so that as an athlete, you can have somebody that you can kind of model your goals around. You can aspire to achieve the success that they achieved. And, you know, I think there are many great representatives of the sport, but I also think that just as an athlete of color, having another athlete of color like you, Shenea, to look up to was really important for me personally in achieving my own success within the sport, and knowing that somebody that looked like me had done what I aspired to do.
How does it feel that there are only a handful of Black coaches? Did you feel that being an athlete rep and being that you are Black was important? Did you feel heard? Were you able to voice concerns of this nature, or was it just not the appropriate time and space? What would you say now if you were in the position of being an athlete rep? Now that the conversation has opened up about racial bias within the sport and voices are being heard.
I think that it is pretty challenging to not have many Black coaches or Black officials within the sport. I think that, you know, personally, my coaches were not of my race, but they were so amazing and so supportive and just really an integral part of my success within the sport. And I think that I personally, though, became an athlete rep because I wanted to not only be a voice for everyone in my region, but I also wanted to be a voice for the people of color. I wanted to be a role model, a person that they could look up to and say, you know, she looks like me and she had success in the sport, and, you know, I can do it too. I can be that person. And I think that while I was athlete rep, I've kind of felt like because I didn't have any just crazy negative experiences revolving racism, that I, you know, didn't really have anything to say like, this happened to me, we need to go and correct this moving forward. But even now, just with the conversation currently being had, like, it's opened my eyes to say that, like, even though you didn't have one, you know, blatantly racist experience, it doesn't mean that these little experiences, these little hardships that you went through during your time as an athlete don't matter. I think that if I had to go back and, you know, be an athlete rep again, I would say, like, though I did not have a crazy, you know, negative experiences revolving around race in the sport, I think that these little things, if corrected, would really help the Black athletes and the athletes of color to have a much more successful time in the sport.
How does it feel to be asked about your experience as a Black acrobatic gymnast and as a Black coach and as an athlete rep?
I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to speak about being a Black athlete and a coach and a rep in the acrobatic gymnastics community. I decided to keep coaching after I stopped acro and become an athlete rep because I just really wanted to be able to, in my own personal way, I guess, give back for what acro has given me. Like, as I said before, I've had so many amazing experiences in the sport, and I think that I really wanted to be a coach and be athlete rep for my region because I wanted to not only be a voice for all athletes, but be a voice for Black athletes and athletes of color, and be a role model for girls and boys who looked like me, and, you know, give them kind of what I struggled to get as in with representation. You know, during my time as an athlete, I wanted to really be that person that they could come to and be a voice for support within the community.
How hard is it to speak about being Black in acro? Or does it feel like a release to share how our experiences are different?
I'm really grateful that I have the opportunity to speak out about the challenges of Black athletes within acrobatic gymnastics. I think, you know, I definitely can't speak for all athletes because I have my own personal experiences, but I feel that it is really, really important that these conversations are being had, and it is really amazing that Black athletes can now speak up in a space that is supportive, in a space that is open, in a space that is just really, again, geared towards improving the sport as a whole and improving the success of its Black athletes.
Samantha, what do you want to see change for Black representation within the sport of acrobatic gymnastics? And who do you think can best help to do this?
I would love to see more representation of the Black community within acrobatic gymnastics. I believe that really utilizing former Black athletes and current Black coaches and Black representatives would be an amazing tool to educate coaches, educate gymnasts, educate the administration, and really create a more diverse and inclusive environment for all gymnasts.
What do you think is the biggest challenge for Black athletes within acrobatic gymnastics now that you are able to see it from a different view as a coach?
Being a coach now and just being on the outside looking in, I think that the biggest challenge today for Black athletes is still just a lack of representation. I feel that it's so beneficial to have someone to look to and say, you know, she went through what I went through and she got out of that and persevered and was successful, or, you know, he really knows what I'm experiencing because he's also experienced the same thing. And I think that just creating that community among, you know, minorities within the sport, among Black athletes within the sport is just so important, because being in a space where you really feel like your voice is being heard, you really feel like you can relate to the people who are in that space with you, who you feel like they know what you're going through and they have your back, and you can look to them to be your role model as you move through your time as an athlete, I think is just extremely beneficial to everyone in the sport.
want to thank you, Samantha, for joining me on this episode of Live Like an Acrobat and for sharing your experiences and sharing your insights with the listeners. And also, too, for reminding me that I was someone that you could look to, that looked like you, that was able to achieve something that you dreamed of achieving. I am so honored by you stating that, and I hope, and I have hoped throughout my career and post my career, that my accomplishments and that my fight within the sport was some light unto the Black acrobatic gymnastics community, and that even though there wasn't so much to look to for inspiration, that if I added to that in any way, I'm deeply grateful and I'm deeply honored that you expressed this. And I honor your continued journey as a coach, as a Black coach within acrobatic gymnastics. You are so essential to the overall change, to standing for athletes who will be having your similar experience, and that you'll be able to guide them in such a profound way with having experienced these things all on your own and achieving so much grace as you did within your own acrobatic gymnastics career. So I look forward to seeing how you prosper in the sport and how you continue to evolve your own personal narrative around inclusivity, diversity, Black representation. I know that it will be inspiring for years to come. So thank you. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Live Like an Acrobat. I hope that you will also join me for extended conversations of each episode of the Live Like an Acrobat podcast on the circuspreneurblog.com. Until my next episode, please stay safe and stay healthy.